Good evening, everybody. I'm Jenny Volin-Katz. I'm the Executive Director of the John Howard Association. I want to thank you for joining us for our second virtual event. As I've shared with many of you, I heard tonight's speaker, Gerrel Jones, speak this fall. I was so impressed by his candor, intellect, and passion in telling his story that I knew we had to find a way to have him speak at a JHA event. I'm so thrilled that he's with us tonight, and I want to thank the Cadence Family Foundation and Project 111 for their generosity so that we could have tonight's event. COVID continues to be the issue of most impact inside our prisons and jails. It's wrought unbelievable hardship and deprivation and filled people in prison with unfathomable fear for their health and safety. In addition to this, we know that as we emerge from the immediate issues raised by the pandemic, we must continue to fight to change our broken system. It is resistant to transparency and accountability and too often void of justice and humanity. System change must be guided by the voices of those who are closest to the problems. Each person's experience shines light into the dark corners of incarceration. Tonight, we'll hear from Gerrel Jones, who describes his journey from convicted murderer to community hero who changes lives as going from a menace to a miracle worker. Born into generational crime, poverty, and abuse, Gerrel committed armed robbery by the time he was 9, was involved in drug trafficking at age 19, and homicide at age 24. Trauma was his foundation. He was broken, angry, and lost. At rock bottom, Gerrel turned himself into a white police officer and started a life sentence. While in prison, he mentored young men and kept in touch with the officer to whom he'd turned himself in. Through his work in prison and Officer Marsh's advocacy, Gerrel earned parole after 20 years. We note that this is something that wouldn't have been possible for him in Illinois. The relationship between the two men demonstrates the power of personal relationships against the threats of racism, a cancel culture, and generational trauma. Gerrel shares his experience and unique perspective on the pervasiveness of trauma in our culture, the traumatic effects of racism on all races, and how we can come together as one people to heal, grow, and move forward. After being released from prison, Mr. Jones continued his education, became a counselor, a violence reduction specialist, and mentored troubled youth across racial lines. He now runs a nonprofit and is dedicated to uplifting the community. Gerrel helps people see the power in their choices and educates the public on how to support healing and be better agents of change for themselves and their neighbors. The voices of those who are most intimately familiar with trauma, crime, and incarceration must be positioned to lead the charge to dismantle the systems that have led to and allowed mass incarceration to flourish. There's much to be done in order to lift up and empower abandoned communities, address racism, poverty, lack of opportunity, to provide access to enfranchisement, reduce trauma, improve societal relationships, and end our reliance on incarceration, which ends the futures and lives of so many people. Gerrel's story is yet another reminder that everyone is someone. We're all capable of change. And if we do not give people opportunities to move forward differently, we all stand to lose. I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker, Gerrel Jones. We've reserved some time at the end of this event for Q&A. If you'd like to submit a question for Gerrel to answer, please enter your question in the box labeled "Type your question below." We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Thank you again for joining us. And now we'll hear from Gerrel.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I am Gerrel Jones, and I want to first thank the John Howard Association for having me and giving me this opportunity to share with you. I was going to begin with something else, but I'm going to say this because I want this to stay on your mind. As long as America believes that retribution is justice, we will never be able to move forward. It is not possible to keep that when it comes to dealing with human beings that we're going to put into the system and then release at some point in the future. It just doesn't make sense. So remember that as long as we think that retribution is justice, we will not be able to succeed. So I am Menace to Miracle Worker. That is the name of my story. When I use the term miracle, I do not use it lightly. It is the absolute truth. I should not be standing here talking to you today. The truth is that if it were just up to laws and just people who, have believed what I have expressed earlier, then I would not be here today. And sometimes people tell me, they say, look, you know what? You have overcome impossible odds. Well, odds means that there's a chance. Truth is that there was no odds. I was sentenced to life in 1992 with, they said, the possibility of parole, but I was also protested by the Attorney General every time I went up for parole. I was a repeat violent offender. It all made sense that I was at 9 years old, I committed my first strong arm robbery, although I wasn't convicted of a crime. At 19 years old, I robbed two white people in Daytona Beach, Florida. I wasn't supposed to get out of prison. I got an escape case shortly after that. I wasn't supposed to get out of prison. And in 1992, I'll tell you about how I ended up stabbing a man to death and ended up with that life sentence. But first, let's go back a little. I'm going to use as a metaphor the basis of this story of a hole. I was born in a hole, a metaphorical hole. My mother was a 15-year-old child when she had me, but the trauma in her life really sets the tone for the trauma that will become my life. My mother lost her virginity at 7 years old. Now she tells this story, so I'm not divulging anything that she's not sharing in the documentary, right? So 7 years old, he loses her virginity to her uncle, being pimped out by her mother. And this is the kind of thing that would go on as a result of, really black people coming out of Jim Crow and slavery, not really having all the ability to humanize their people. Plus, they're in survival mode. So it was about eating. And it's a tragic story. How does a person even begin to overcome that? And my mother tells me the stories of how she was ostracized even by her brothers and sisters, as well as her parents. And ultimately, she wanted to get out of that situation. So what does she do? She gets pregnant by a 24-year-old drug addict and alcoholic, who was kind of a ghetto player. My biological father, I never really knew him. 9 of cirrhosis of the liver. He had his own issues. There were a lot of rumors about how his family was constructed. But she did decide to marry, for security's sake, a man that was in the military. So she's thinking, as a 18-year-old girl at this point, she's thinking that, well, I'm going to have some security, which is a lot of what young women coming up in the underserved communities think about. How do I find security for my child? And so she marries this guy who's in the military. She truly doesn't even know that she and he share the same last name until 2 months later. 2 months, they get to marry. They're going to go to the courthouse, and if she finds out, oh, your last name is the same as mine. That's how little she knew about this man. She tells me that he spent their wedding night with another woman, but she wanted security. So he was in the military. So, maybe that was going to be security. Well, she didn't understand his history. We find out later that his mother was 12 years old when she got pregnant with him, gave him to her older sisters. Older sister was an alcoholic. So he's raised in a shotgun house with an alcoholic. He doesn't have coping skills. And on top of that, for me, I'm born legally blind. Now, legal blindness is not it's not complete blindness. It just means that you see shapes. You don't see things very clearly. I think it's measured by 2200 vision in either eye. So I didn't even know that I had bad eyes. So here I was, this child coming up in this environment with these unhealthy people. And back then, child abuse was a different thing. You can be beaten with an extension cord. It was okay. You could be beaten with switches and broom handles. It was okay. Now you can't yell at a kid without going to jail. But at that time, you could pretty much do anything you wanted to. In fact, during the time that my folks came up, you could do anything you wanted to with black people. And I want to emphasize Alabama, which had the moniker Birmingham at that time, because you could randomly kill black people, blow up their churches and all that stuff. And see, people don't like to think that plays a role in how culture is developed. And the ripple effects of that, we're still feeling this day. The ghettos that were created by redlining are a real thing. In fact, those ghettos that were created by redlining are producing a lot of the criminality that we see today as a result of the poverty and the marginalization, the lack of education, all those things that contribute to people acting out of what we call healthy norms. And so I grow up with these people. And by the time I'm 17, I'm probably the most angry person in the world. At 17, my mother put a gun to my head. That's how volatile the situation was in my home. But in the meantime, I was also an academic. traveling from place to place, right? I really didn't get an opportunity to develop any roots. So I kind of developed this chameleon like, existence. You had to adjust from place to place to try to fit in and so on and so forth. And I don't know if you can understand what it's like to wear glasses that are about this thick. I should go get them so that you can have a prop to see them, but they're as thick as Coke bottles. So I had these Coke bottles, and then I had these lips. I was born with them. It took me about 30 years to grow into them. And little black kids we play a game with each other called the dozens, and we tear up each, or janking or cracking. Some people call it different things, but the idea is that whoever can put the other person down the best, that's who wins the laughing match. That's where a lot of our comedians come from. We make a practice of putting one another down. Now, I'm not saying that's the worst thing. You can have fun with that, but I'm saying that there's a cultural thing that comes out of all of the pressures. For me, I had to learn how to crack every time I moved. It was pressure to have to fit in, to have to overcome the stigma. So my self-esteem issues were pretty significant. But one of the things that I do believe happened with my brain, and I make jokes about this sometimes when I'm in the room with a bunch of really smart people like you. I said that my hippocampus is probably larger than yours because the hippocampus is responsible for memory. And because I couldn't see very well, it was important for me to learn how to hear things. Hearing was important. I could hear when a car was coming because I couldn't see it. I could hear when an animal was growling because I couldn't see it. I could hear when people were coming, walking, right? And so it was important to me. But what it did was it made it easier for me to learn. I learned watching television. I never had any babysitters. My mother would tell you I never had any babysitters. She'd sit me in front of the television and I would watch television and I would learn. And that's where I learned how to speak. And I don't know how many of you remember this voice, and that's the way it is. Sunday, September 14th. That was Walter Cronkite. I used to love to imitate the people on TV. And that's where I learned to speak and inadvertently learn how to code switch, which was something else that Black people still have to do to this day. So as a young black boy, growing up in those environments, by the time I got to be 17 years old and on into 18 years old, graduating high school, actually I was senior class president. My academia was so good that I could learn and listen and learn. It was like through osmosis, things would sink into my head. So I never really had a problem with that. And so people thought I should be a lot smarter in my decision making than I was. But they didn't understand the turmoil on the inside. When you're keeping all the secrets at home, your parents are using marijuana, they're getting drunk, your dad may have beat your mom a time or two, your mom's got boyfriends, your dad got girlfriends, and you're the only child and you're keeping the secrets. Your mom's depressed, your dad's he's got some mental health kicks. In fact, my stepdad in 1985, 84, 85, and I still don't know all the details of it, but I know he got out of the Army. And he wasn't going to work. He wasn't bringing money home. It was a really weird situation. And my mother was depressed. And so I really never saw them. My 4 years of high school, I really don't ever remember having a conversation with my mother. Most of my life, all 18 years that I spent with the man that was supposed to be my father, was supposed to be raising me, I never had a conversation with him. So when I leave home, I don't want to have anything to do with those scholarship opportunities that I got. Listen, I had scholarship offers from William and Mary, Pomona, Davidson, Oberlin. My PSAT scores were through the roof my junior year. I was a pretty smart guy. And like I said, people thought I should be able to make better decisions. Well, I didn't. I immediately got into crime because I didn't want to have anything to do with my parents. People said, well, why didn't you go to college? You could have gotten away from your parents then. But see, I didn't understand that. Now, nobody had counseled me that I could be free to a certain degree in college. I thought that I would still be accountable to them, and I just wanted to have nothing to do with that. So I took the shortcuts, and it was survival. And I'm not making any excuses for myself, but that's what led to drug addiction. That's what led to armed robbery. That's what led to my first 3 trips in prison. Listen, so what I'm telling you tonight is this. I'm going to tell you how I became a horrible person. Then I'm going to tell you how you paid for me to become a worse person inside the system. And then I'm going to tell you how I overcame that and what you can do to help other people overcome that. But here's the thing. That first and second trip to prison was on armed robbery and escape. And when I went in, I was a scared boy. 20 years old. I was a scared boy, and I had to figure out how to navigate a brutal world, a prey and predator type mentality. That's what people had. And so I didn't know anything about that on that level, but I had to learn, and I had to learn it quickly. So I watched people, and literally by the time I got out, now I only spent 3 years on all of that, but by the time I got out, I was sure that I was done, that there was no more opportunities for me to become a successful person because I was young, I was black, and I was convicted. So everybody told me that means that you're out of the game. So I got back into criminality. I got back into doing things that were counterproductive to my health. And at this point, I'm in 1991 and 92. I'm in College Park, Georgia. And I'm in an illicit relationship with two women. And without getting into the details, it was two white women. The thing is that somebody called the police, and they said that I was doing something to them that I wasn't. It wasn't real. They just made up some stuff. But a police officer came with his partner, a white police officer from Fayetteville, Georgia, came to the house. And he didn't beat me up. He didn't scream at me. He didn't pull a gun on me, anything like that. He just took me to jail. The ladies came and got me out the next day. And whenever that police officer saw me out on the street, what he would do from that point forward, he'd pull up on me, hit the lights, and then talk to me about putting my life together. And Jesus. I wasn't really on the Jesus thing at that point, but because in my mind, when I grew up, the way everybody worshiped. Anyway, point is this. I don't want to offend anybody, but I will just say this. I was not going to be a religious person. So he decided that he would help me by sending me back to my hometown of Birmingham. Well, he did. Well, part of the story I told you earlier, one of the victim in this case was actually a part of that story. That story of my mother being molested and raped and so on and so forth and all those things. So my great grandmother, who, by the way, had shot my great grandfather while she was married to him, and my great grandfather had killed her brother. And her daughter had killed a man in the bed, and their grandson, my uncle, had killed a man for a piece of chicken not for a piece of chicken, but about a piece of chicken in Alabama penal system. So he was famous for that. So this is I'm telling you the bedrock of where I come from. So this man was my great grandmother's boyfriend, who had been allowed to molest and sexually assault the children and things of that nature. And, I don't know all the details of it. My mother recounts the stories to me, and some of my cousins recount the story. I just knew that I never liked him, even coming up as a young person. So by the time I'm 24, about to turn 25, I have some significant hatred for this man. And we have a conflict. And we have a conflict largely about race. He didn't appreciate that I was in a relationship with white women. Didn't like white people. And again, that was part of his understanding, his upbringing. White people were bad. And so I was castigated because I didn't really have that same attitude. And matter of fact, I sound like a white person to him. So I had that to deal with. I wasn't black enough. I wasn't gangster enough. I wasn't white enough. So what do you fit in? At any rate, we have a conflict. And that night I stab him to death as a result of that conflict. And instead of being exonerated or vindication for this retribution that I had exacted, what I felt was guilt and shame. So what happened was I hitchhiked back to Atlanta and turned myself into this police officer. So, no good deed goes unpunished, right? He sends me to Birmingham to get myself together. What I do is I bring him back a homicide, right? So, and I'm not laughing. This is 30 years later, but that must have been an awful feeling for him. But instead of saying, oh my God, what am I going to do? What about these black folks? He didn't say any of that. Remember, he's from Fayetteville, Georgia. He's a white police officer. What he did was he turned me in. And then he testified on my behalf in my trial. He sent me money. He, when I went to prison, was sentenced to life. He came to see me as much as he could. He represented me in my parole hearings. He advocated for me and created an opportunity for me to have someone that I was connected to that was encouraging me on a daily basis. This was a major motivator for me because, again, I was sent to the maximum security prison, West Jefferson, William Donaldson, which is named after a correctional officer that was stabbed. They called it the House of Pain. And so there I was, 160 pounds of former murderer and robber and all this stuff. And I'm thinking I need to put my life together because of this person. Because if it had not been for him, the truth is, if it had not been for him, right, I probably would have just gotten back in. I'm sure that I would have gotten back into survival mode. But because he and who he was, because of who he was putting confidence in me, I started moving forward. And I say that because that is going to be a very, very integral part of having us change. We need to change the system. We really need to, instead of isolating prisoners, we need to put them in community. At any rate, those first two times you paid for me to get that I went to prison, tax dollars paid for me to get worse. This time, because of the impact of that person, I started moving forward. Well, the first thing that I wanted to discover was, why was my head so jacked up? How come I could not make a good decision for anything in the world? I had educational opportunities that other people didn't have. I had, people ask me this all the time. I said, well, you got to understand that what you see on the outside of a person is their representative. It is their avatar. Nobody ever shows you what's really going on, or not the first time you meet them. And so a person can't heal damage that they're not exposing. And so there has to be an environment where there's safety, and prison is not that. And that's part of the problem. There has to be a place where a person can say that they've got issues that they need help with, that they're out of control. What we do is we dump people into this environment and basically tell them, hey, look, these are the rules, right? You'll get punished if you do this, you'll get a reward if you do this. And we're going to ring this bell, and you're going to come out and go play, and you're going to go over here, and you're going to have yard call. And we allow them to create this subculture of predatory behavior that creates more victims and force people to operate in that system. And then we're going to let them out 10, 15, 20 years later and expect them to function in a healthy society. That's crazy. Well, somebody's going to say this. And I know somebody's going to say this. They always do. Well, they are trade schools, and some people take advantage of that. But what I just described to you in my life was coming from a really, really maladaptive base. The family norms were not healthy. The societal structures were not healthy. And so the stuff that was dumped in, that I make my decisions with, the way my paradigms were shaped, they were not to be able to be even motivated. I didn't even know how to look for the right thing. And the same thing I see when I'm working in underserved communities now. A lot of times access is not about the resource not being there. It's about people don't even know how to go look for it, because of the stuff that their paradigms are made out of. When I say paradigms, I mean their belief systems, the way they put thoughts together, the way they handle emotion, right? It's damaged. And we've got to be able to mitigate that fact through treatment of some sort, or bringing some kind of vehicle in that addresses that, particularly in prison, if we're going to send people back out. So in this case, I was able to do that. I started studying things and putting pieces together, and with the help of my friend on the outside, I recognized some things that were really important. Community. I read this book in 1996, written by Dr. Viktor Frankl. It was Man's Search for Meaning. And he was a Auschwitz survivor, a concentration camp survivor, psychiatrist, doctor, a whole bunch of stuff, really smart guy. And while he was in these concentration camps, what he did was he found out the value of making himself available to treat the weaknesses of other people. He actually found purpose in treating the weakness of other people. And what he was doing, and the word is not necessarily used in this situation, but he created a community around himself, not necessarily a big community. A lot of these people were dying. They were simply dying. But the idea of being communal in that environment, looking through faults to get down to needs, is what I got out of that situation. So I started to become a mentor to guys that were around me. Now, this is where it really gets miraculous at. When I started helping these guys, because I realized that I was going to die in prison. Like I said, the Attorney General was, protesting my parole every time. I accepted it. I'm going to die in prison. 5 times I go up for parole, I'm continually denied. I'm going to die in prison. So I turned myself to these men, and everything that I learned about me, I could see in them, and I could give them the tools. So when they would get out of prison, this is what would happen. Their lives would be so drastically impacted that their family members would want to get involved with me. One in particular, awesome. This part of the story, sometimes I'm still blown away by it. It's 8.5 years later now since I've been out of prison, but it's still amazing to me. What we would call a good old boy from Springville, Alabama, came up to me, saw what I was doing, and he said, "Man, I'm trying to figure out what kind of game you're running." And he had been in and out of prison since he was 16 years old. Anyway, I took him through it, the discipleship process, and told him, why a lot of times we jack up and so on and so forth. And he was like, man, he just fell in love with the process. He says, you got to meet my brother. Well, his brother's a Christian man, one of the most loving people that I have ever met in my life. Is a white man from Springville, Alabama, who was flying the Confederate flag, drove pickup, the stereotypical stuff you see that when you see it from a distance, you're gonna say that's what that is, but it's not. It's not what it was. I would have said that that's one of those racist, blah, 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 looking from the outside in, but it wasn't. This man is literally the most loving person I have ever met in my life. And so when he met me, he said, I saw you in a vision. And he said that I want to help you. And his help came in this form, which is amazing to me. Right. So he says, God wants me to help you get out of prison. Now, you got to understand this picture. Right? So I'm this black thug with a history of criminality, and I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. He's from Springville. He's a good old boy, right? He wants to help you get out. First of all, I've been denied parole 5 times. So when he says that, I'm like, bro, God wants me to stay here. I'm pretty sure. He says no. Long story made very, very short. There's a lot of really wonderful details in this that you don't have time for tonight. But he called his lawyer, who was a former state senator. Phone call was made. I don't know what was said or whatever, but I know that the next time I went in for parole, that advocacy, and along with the other family members, they let me go. That was 2012, October 2012. But hitting the ground running wasn't really enough. Even though I had adapted to some things, they handed me an iPhone 4. I said, wow, Captain Kirk never had one of these. But, I don't know how many of you remember Captain Kirk. But anyway, there was some transition issues. I went to a halfway house. But then after a couple of months of staying with some wonderful cousins, right, and, it was just, they were wonderful people, but it was just uncomfortable. That white guy from Springville, Alabama, asked me to move into his home. Now, understand that this is not supposed to happen. I'm a big old black dude. I'm 6. At that time, I'm 6 foot, 212 pounds of solid granite. I just, spent 20 and a half years in prison. You're gonna move me in with you and your wife? Are you crazy? But that's how his faith worked. And I stayed up there for 3.5 years. And for 3.5 years, I built my understanding of what a man is supposed to look like to a woman as I watched him and his wife, how a man's supposed to handle business, so on and so forth. But I said earlier that I couldn't get a job. So the police officer, former police officer now, 20 years later, bought me lawn care equipment so I could start a business. So I was an entrepreneur before I even had a job. I did enroll at the University of Alabama. They shut down, held up my registration. Now, I was sure that it was a civil rights violation, but because of my criminal history. But I just wanted to go to school, so I just dealt with it. I took the battery of psychological tests that they put me through. I passed those, and then I ended up with an academic scholarship, of course, right? Partial academic scholarship. I was a double major, psychology and African American studies. And, I felt pretty good about myself. I'm developing confidence. I got some wins. 2.5 years out of prison, I bought my first car, brand new. 4.5 years out of prison, I bought my house. Now, that's not necessarily remarkable to all of you who are able to buy houses whenever you get ready. But for me, it was significant because when I moved off that mountain in Springville and to buy my house, I decided to buy in the neighborhood that had the highest number of homicides on purpose. Because I knew that if the stuff that I was doing was working in prison, it would work in these communities out here. And that's exactly what happened. And so we built an organization together, me, the police officer, and that good old boy from Springville, Alabama. Dana Marsh is the police officer. Doug Waniger is the good old boy from Springville, Alabama. These are my 2 best friends in the world. Guess what? They're both Trump supporters. well, they voted for Trump. I'll put it like that. I am not. Right. So we have these philosophies that are very different, but we know that love is what keeps us. Love and community is what keeps us. That's the priority. We have some significant disagreements, but the priority is that we love each other. And that's what will help us deal with this prison system. So now, here I am today. I've been asked to run for city council. It's crazy. I'm 8 years out of prison, still on parole, and they're asking me to run for city council. I've never seen such a thing. It's miraculous. And that's why I say minister, miracle worker. The things that we do in the community, putting the neighbor back in the neighborhood, teaching people how to change social norms, it's awesome, right? I'm excited about it. There are wins. I got married. I tricked some woman, into marrying me. Right? No, wonderful woman. I met her on my 50th birthday. So and she had 2 sons. So now I'm a stepfather. I'm a husband. We got 4 cats and a chihuahua. I mean, life is good, right? But the main thing For me, what keeps me going is being able to know that I can look through people's faults and get down to need. So now look, how did this happen? It didn't happen as a result of the regular prison system. How can you contribute to the prison system changing? There's a way that we need to do ministry. The first thing is that we need to see these people, these human beings, not as objects ever again. Stop right now. If you think of a prisoner as a person with no name and a number, just a number. If you think of a prisoner as someone who you see on TV on 48 at First 48 or those prison shows, that is error. That is media. That is not going to be right. Because if you looked at me in 1992, you want to hear something interesting? 1992, I was sentenced to, or 1993, after a year and a half in the county jail, I was sentenced to life in the courtroom by Judge Michael McCormick. 20 years later, the judge that's in that courtroom, I end up serving at her wedding and signing autographs in that same courtroom. But 20 years prior to that, nobody would have thought that I would be back signing autographs in that courtroom. What I'm telling you is that when you're looking at prisoners today, you don't know what they're going to be later. But what you've got to do is be willing to make the investments in their humanity, in the development of their humanity. We cannot objectify people. There are services that need to be provided. Everybody that goes into the prison system pretty much is going to be suffering from a mental health issue. Why do we not provide that as a primary source of their redemption or their rehabilitation? It's necessary. Why would we not? Part of the problem, again, as I say, is as long as we see retribution as justice, we will always fail at being what's good for people. Now, the thing is that you're going to pay for it in recidivism. And some people say, well, recidivism isn't that big a deal. Let's just say recidivism is higher than 50%, but let's just say it was 50%. If your employer didn't pay you 50% of the time, you would change something. And what we're talking about is human beings, fathers, sons, grandfathers, mothers, daughters. We're talking about people. We're talking about people with intellectual capital. We're talking about people who would be able to provide their sweat equity, and people who would be able to provide their financial capital if we gave them an opportunity to do it. And I'm not saying that everybody is quote unquote deserves to be out of prison. I know that I'm living an extreme amount of grace right now. What I'm saying that we're going to let 80 to 90% of those people back out, and that we have a responsibility as citizens to do what we can to make sure that their transition into society makes them able to be a contributor just like I am. I should not be an outlier in these situations. I should be the norm. But somebody's got to care. All right, so I believe that I will close out with this. That I had to dig out of was very valuable to me. I was born in a hole, and I was forced to have to climb. Now, the thing about climbing, and I don't know how many rock climbers we got out of there, you know this, that, sometimes you got to rest. If you got a real high mountain, you got to rest. Well, it's the same thing with the hole. You got to rest when you're climbing so that your muscles can rest and strengthen. In this case, with this metaphor, the muscles are character traits. So I had to climb out of this hole that I was born in. And actually, I was born in the hole, then I dug it deeper, so that made it even worse. But as I started climbing out, I would rest, and I would climb some more. Some days I would climb higher than others. Well, it took me 20 years to climb out of that hole. When I got to the top of the hole, though, and I did 20 years later, what I found was that all the strength that I had gained from climbing, I got to keep. And because I had that strength, I was able to do things that people who had never had to climb like that couldn't do. Whereas they could walk, I could run. Whereas they could run, I could fly. And so that's how I became a miracle worker. People think that it is amazing what I do with the youth in our community. I think it's wonderful, but I think everybody should be doing it. And you have the opportunity now. If you can see me and recognize that this is a living miracle, it's not just overcoming the odds, it's overcoming it's impossible, then you can create the same type of miracles. And if you can't do it yourself, then you need to contribute to somebody who can. Resource the people who are willing to do the work that you may not be able to do. With that said, I will open up for Q&A. I believe Are we all right? Are we on schedule?
I think we are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, Gerrel, thank you for sharing your amazing story with us. It is inspiring. It is, always helpful, I think, and just illuminating for people to hear about the actual lived experiences rather than just hearing the John Howard Association talk about the experiences people inside share with us. So we really appreciate your time and openness with us this evening.
Yeah.
The first question.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm just in no particular order. I'm going to throw the questions that are coming in back at you. So the first question is, did you have any support systems while you were in prison the last time, other than the person who helped you with parole at the end, who became your lifelong friend? Up until that point, did you have any other outside supports, people that visited you and kept your spirits up while you were in?
So Dana, the police officer that originally arrested me for domestic violence, and then I turned myself into, he was as supportive as he could be. People are living life out there, so he couldn't always be there. If you're speaking about my family, the only person that in my family that came to visit me was I had two cousins, and those cousins, they came to visit me, I think, twice while I was in. They didn't even know I was in prison. That's how distant they were on my father's side of the family. But my mother came as often as she could. Now, the situation with my mother was one that I described. Her life wasn't any better. She was living in abject poverty. She was just not doing well, with her situation. And she finally divorced my stepdad after 28 years. He, by the way, I didn't mention this, but he died of a heart condition that was related to his cocaine use. So, no, there was not a whole lot of stuff. Every now and then you meet somebody that you'll have a pen pal, you'll get a prison girlfriend, that kind of stuff. But, any consistent support was, no, there was not that.
Next question.
Let me say this, though. Let me say this about that. The guys around me, though, that the relationships that I developed in prison, right, where they did have support and things like that. There were some really, really great guys that did develop community that, provided opportunities for us to have like family in there.
That's interesting, because the next question is, do you keep in touch with any of the people who are part of your community in prison?
Absolutely. And so I've represented some at parole hearings since I've been out, using my example, made some really good relationships, I guess, as good as I could with the parole board because of what I've been able to do when I got out. So they were like, yeah, I know you. Yeah, I remember you. Right. Yeah. And so I was trusted as someone who could vet people with the parole board. So these are the only guys that I represented were guys that I knew that I had been with. Right. I would not represent everybody at a parole hearing. Everybody's not ready. Everybody's not through cooking yet. Right. But these are guys that grew up in systems that I had actually contributed. That were doing time in systems that I had contributed. Right now, I'm never going to get credit for this, but what they call the faith dorms right now in the state of Alabama. In 2000, I was working for the state chaplaincy coordinator, and I actually contributed to the state policy for the faith dorms that they have right now. So, every major institution in Alabama has one, and it's got my fingerprint on it.
So understanding that a lot of your transformation came through things that you read, information that you pursued on your own, besides the works that you read that really informed your perspective and your path to change, were there any programs like formal prison programs or treatment opportunities or any kind of formal programming that was provided by the prison that you found to be particularly helpful?
Absolutely. So in 1995, and I don't know why this isn't pervasive, but in 1995, I moved from William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility to St. Clair, which both of them are maximum security prisons. And entered this program called the Therapeutic Community, New Outlook Therapeutic Community. And at that time, it had been founded in 1988. So 1995 it was only 7 years old. So it was still kind of fresh. And there were a lot of guys that were really serious about recovery. Now, the therapeutic community concept, listen to the term, therapeutic community. I mean, that tells you everything right there. So it's a behavior modification program, conditioning you to make decisions, self-examination, relationship development, character development. I was introduced to a whole nother language. Probably up until 1995, when I entered that community, I had never even imagined what a healthy community would look like. Problem solving skills, right? All these things were emphasized. And so it set me on a path for being able to understand myself, how my head worked, how my thoughts worked with my feelings, how my belief system motivated my thoughts and my feelings, and all those working together, shaped my behaviors. I started identifying triggers. The therapeutic community is where I started realizing, everybody's pretty much jacked up, right? So in one way or another, right? But yeah, that program was awesome. Problem with it is that there were only 2 therapeutic communities in the state of Alabama. So you got I don't know how many prisoners at that time, but let's just say 15,000. You got 15,000 prisoners, and you got this program that can only house 200, and you got another program, Adventurous, that can only house 200. And so and then these guys are cycling out. They're cycling out of prison. Some of them are failing, having to go through the program again. So you never really touch the larger part of the population. And not only that, but staffing a program like this is not the easiest thing to do, because one of the things that you're going to have to develop in your first parts, or when you first start, is people who can become credible messengers and examples, because mentoring is having a big brother, which is mentoring, is a big part of the program. So one of the, I think, weaknesses of the program is that if you got a guy who is trying to, be a good guy, and he's seeing guys get out of prison, and no matter what he does, he can't be rewarded that way. That's one of the frustrations. So you end up with a bunch of guys in the program that have life without parole. They never want to go anywhere else in the prison. They've created a comfortable environment, so they're not trying to impact the rest of the prison. You got to come to them. And then there's because of the concepts that we practiced in that program, which with high levels of accountability, they would call it snitching, and it's a snitch dorm. So it was unpopular with a bunch of the criminal element, the people that wanted to stay on that continuum that were in the in the population. And so that there were all kinds of problems with being able to reach a whole lot of people. But yes, and you had trade schools in prison. Again, the problem with trade schools in prison is it's not forced. There's no real reward system. And so when you're dealing with an infantile kind of state of mind, a self-centered state of mind that can't really, delay gratification, it's very hard to get people that even want to go to that program. They'd rather just go to yard call. They'd rather just, go to the kitchen and steal some chicken and, that kind of stuff, just make it easy on themselves. And then the other thing is that a lot of guys, just legitimately, they have brain damage, and trauma has affected their lives. They can't focus in a learning environment. It's one of the reasons why they quit school in the first place. So those are not, altogether real options for a lot of the prison population. And I know that people always say, well, they got these programs in prison. Yeah, man, but everybody's mind is not ready. It's like saying everybody should go to college, which I think is one of those errors that we've forced upon, Americans in our culture. You got to go to college to get it. Everybody's mind is not ready for that stuff. And definitely, if a person is on the criminality continuum, his mind is not generally going to be on that. I, again, am an anomaly in that case.
So I want
Does
to go
that
back
help?
to, yeah,
Yeah.
I absolutely think it helps, and it was a great response. Based on something you just said, and a lot of the questions that are coming in are asking basically the same thing, which, if distilled down, is really how did you become a credible messenger? How was it that you came to be in a position to mentor other people while you were in prison? And, both how did your own evolution get you there? And then how did you establish yourself as a credible messenger?
Right. So one of the things that prisoners, okay, so if you look at prison culture is designed when you walk in. I want you to think about this. I'm going to explain some deep stuff right here. The same way that you would train slaves, if this was 1750, is the same way you train prisoners. When a person goes into prison, you are stripped of your identity. The most important thing about you is your number. That number is going to let you eat. That number is going to let you get mail. That number is going to let you use the phone. That number is everything to you. They're going to shave your head or cut your hair off, right? Depending on what religion you are. Back then they did, they just cut everybody's hair. But they're going to put you in the same white uniform so that your individuality, your sense of identity is kind of woven into one. You are borged when you come in, and this is your function. Everything is going to be structured for you. You're going to go to chow at this time. You're going to get counted, sit up on your bed at this time. You're going to look at all that stuff is very, very structured. And the reason for that is so that you can be controlled, because 40 people on a shift can't really control 2,000. It's not possible unless there's some mind control down. So the mind control is to put you in a frame of mind where you are in need of the correction staff to get everything done for you. You're in need of them to let you use the phone. You're in need of them to let you outside. You're in need of them to let you use the shower. You're in need. Now, what this does is this takes away all of your decision making, right? So you don't get to make those 8,000 decisions that you made when you were free. You got 8 to make now. That's going to atrophy your decision maker. You don't really have much to decide on. So what that does is that puts you in a kind of retrograde state of being, right? You're no longer allowed to be an adult. You have to be a child. So what I did was I recognized that. And so I said, okay, so I've got to pursue my manhood, or my maturity. So part of that, those structured dorms, they do that. Those dorms we created allowed me to develop that attitude. Now, I was one that actually did go into population and have the same type of impact on people around me. So my credibility came with me being consistently a man. Here's what and I hope you can understand that. When a person is a child in his mind, he will respect a consistent man. It's the same thing that I experience out here. I'm the healthy in my neighborhood with the kids that I'm dealing with. I am probably, in most cases, the most healthy male influence they have ever experienced. So it's important to them. And for a person whose mind has been infantilized, right, it is important to have someone who is healthy, and what they do is they respect that. But you got to show it. There's got to be consistency. You can't fold under certain conditions. So the first part of the question is, how did I become a credible messenger to those men? That was how I became a credible messenger. But it also impacted, some correction staff. Now, I was treated very poorly by a lot of correction staff because, again, part of the psychological slavery is that we want you to think that you don't have any control. So part of the phraseology in the Alabama penal system is, inmate don't run nothing. But it was clear that I had a lot of influence. And I was actually moved from prison to prison at times. Now, what was the second part of that question? Because the first answer was kind of elaborate. How did I become a credible messenger?
Yeah, and just providing more detail around the mentorship you did while you were in prison.
Right. So same thing out here is that consistency and loving people. Here's a key. Everybody in prison knows that they got faults, and they're not necessarily trying to be reminded of that on a daily basis. Just like these kids out here, just like you're not trying to necessarily be reminded about that on a daily basis. What you want is for somebody to look through your faults and get down to your need. And that's where I found purpose at. Same thing with these kids out here. I already know that you jacked up, right? There will be correction after I give you the loving that you need. And loving, I have an acronym for love. It's LOVE. It's lift others and value everyone. But it includes being able to look through the fault. And where did I get that from? Dana. Dana Marsh. Dana Marsh, his white police officer, saw me as a drug dealer, a possible pimp, a possible whole bunch of things, right? And knew I had a record as armed robber. I was a bad guy, but he looked through the fault to get down to the need, and it made him credible to me. Now, is that an easy thing to do? I already know. I already hear some of your stomachs, getting upset, right? It is not an easy thing to do. Loving is never going to be without sacrifice. I've been disappointed time and again, but guess what? I've also disappointed some people time and again. This has to become an identity. And for me, it was easy for me to become an identity because I knew I wasn't going anywhere. I believed that I was going to die in prison. And so because I was in that state, it was like, this is where I've got to express my purpose. Back to Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning.
So, Gerrel, a lot of people are writing in and, they are noting what a bright person you are, how articulate you are, and what a good student you were, and that you had these scholarship opportunities and struggling to reconcile that, right, with the initial outcomes of your incarceration or landing in prison. And I think you just spoke to that a little bit when you talked about the child mindset and having to become a man. But what I take from all the questions about this is people would really like to hear a little bit more about, the steps in that journey that got you, to a point where you were able to sort of harness your talents.
Right. I hear you. So we have to talk about ACEs, what we call ACEs now, ACES. We have to talk about adverse childhood experiences. Remember that, adverse childhood experiences. One adverse childhood experience can change can put a child on the path for addiction, criminality. Just one. I had several. Right now, people will oftentimes say, "Well, that's excuse making. You still had opportunities." You got to understand this: that your paradigms, your belief systems about God, about yourself, and about other people are all going to be shaped by the initial caregivers that you have. If your initial caregivers, I don't care how gifted and talented you are, and we see this all the time in people who become wealthy and who become what we call successful, and then they'll do some stupid ish, right? It's like, where did that come from? Well, think about this: Ted Bundy, R. Kelly. Think about their past. Think about their histories. Think about what happened in their early childhood that shaped these intelligent, talented people. Think about some of the football players. Think about, some of the people that we revere. There are things that happened in my early childhood that developed my psyche. By the time I was 7 years old, there was a basic script. And at least by the time you're 12, if you don't like 7, by the time you're 12, there's a basic script that's very difficult to break. Ask your average alcoholic, ask your average bulimic, ask these people who manifest like me, who manifest these abhorrent behaviors, but who have all this talent. And we end up having to find our voice later on. Being an intellect does not mean that you have character. I truly had more talent than my character could carry. The talent could get me indoors, but my character would always come up and bring me out. So when you're raising children, recognize this. And when you're dealing with children, please, there are things that you can say and do that will affect that child's psyche in ways that are going to be ripples way down the line. When we're talking about 1 in 6, no, that's not right. It's 61% of all children report an adverse childhood. By the time they're in the 8th grade, report an adverse childhood, who have report an adverse childhood experience, right? And so there's a reason for this stuff happening. It's not about blaming. Yes, I was gifted, but I did not have the character to carry those gifts. And parenting plays a major role in what your child's character is going to be. Again, I make no excuses for myself. I wear it all, but I didn't have the mind then that I have now. And I wish I did. If I had, we wouldn't be here talking.
I understand that. Okay. I think we've got time for one last question this evening before we're going to have to wrap up. And the question is, it's an interesting one. In your opinion, what's the most important thing a person from the outside who wants to volunteer inside a jail or prison can do to be of use to people who are incarcerated?
Okay, probably, and the most important thing that an individual can do is find an individual, one individual that you can develop a relationship with. And if you're a woman, it needs to be with a woman. If you're a man, it needs to be with a man. Because most of us in prison are going to be functioning from a survival, attitude, and you're going to be considered simply a resource, right? So you got to know that going in. Get you some real education about, the psychology of a prisoner. I probably need to write a book on it, right? But the psychology of a prisoner is really important for you to understand going in, so that you're not just contributing to a maladaptive cycle. But it does need to be male to male and needs to be female to female. Um, Something else that you can do is find organizations, and they're not definitely not always churches. I've said this, and I don't mind saying it, that one of the failings of our church communities is that they think that they're going in doing a great service, but actually, in practice, because there'll be 30 of them allowed in, you're dividing the community. Whatever you can do to help prisoners understand that they need to develop a community of healthy norms and healthy mores, healthy concepts that they can function in, and they don't need to have any divisiveness among them. Part of the problem, again, like I said, with some are assertive, is that they actually contribute to the divisiveness. So I would say this, right? You know, if you're an individual, deal with one individual and set a time. If you're going to deal with them for the rest of their lives, if they're in prison, then deal with them on that level. But you're always trying to look to develop a person's character, even from where you're at. If for those of you who are Christian, the Apostle Paul wrote a bunch of his letters developing character in people from prison. So you can do that. Just don't be a simple resource for cookies and soups. Cookies and soups are not going to help me.
Great. So first, I want to thank Gerrel for an amazing evening, for sharing your time and your story with us. I also want to thank the Cadence Family Foundation and Project 111 for making this event possible. And I also want to thank everybody who's joined us this evening, and thank you for offering such fantastic questions and helping us create such an interesting dialogue. This event has been recorded, and it'll be available on JHA's website shortly. Please feel free to share it with anyone you think might be interested. As many of you know, this year marks 120 years of the JHA going into Illinois prisons to monitor the conditions of confinement and talk to the people who are incarcerated in order to learn more about them and bring their voices and experiences out to the public and into efforts for system change. John Howard will continue to fight for increased transparency, for people in prison to be treated with dignity and respect, and for a system that is just and humane and seeks to help, not harm, those people who have hurt and also been hurt. As always, your support is what allows us to continue our work. Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for your continued partnership. We appreciate everybody's involvement, and we appreciate your being included in all of our efforts to change this broken system. Have a great night and take care. Be healthy, be safe, be well.